All right, let's get this party started. Let's start with the Patreon questions. Huge fan to every huge fan, huge thanks, huge something to everyone on Patreon, as always, for getting so many of their questions in. And it starts with Christopher, who says, "In history, what underperforming test side could have played baseball and got the best results?" Uh, I suppose the problem is that so much of baseball so far has been softball rather than baseball, and then you've got the last three tests, which probably went back to normal form in some ways. Of they couldn't really bat, but South Africa got the worst of the conditions a couple of times there, and that went in that particular direction. So from that perspective, there were probably some times in the West Indies over the last 10 years, certainly, where they had some very flat batting pitches, and they used to use this ball. I forget what the name of it was. Um, they used to use this ball that was like a rock, um, and it didn't really do much for bowlers at all on incredibly dire test wickets. That's probably that's the combination you want, isn't it? You want a wicket that is very flat, and you want a ball that's not particularly doing anything. I suppose that also would allow for the Kookaburra. Trying to think, but they have to be an underperforming side. Don't know if the Kookaburra. Maybe some of the then again, I'm not sure the Sri Lankan sides were massively underperforming. Yeah, it does need, and also then you need to have incredible white ball hitters, right, as well. So from that perspective, that West Indies era side is certainly one that jumps to mind. As far as anyone else, I don't think I've got anyone that massively that rings that bell instantly. But yeah, definitely that West Indies period of having those two things, and I think that's an important thing of you know the baseball style is that you have to have white ball hitters, you have to have pitches that aren't crumbling, and you have to have a ball that's not doing anything. So Kookaburra ball. Until recently was definitely that ball. So until 2018 when they reinforced it, was certainly that kind of ball. Uh, but it rules out almost all of Asia because a lot of those pitches collapse. And maybe the Sri Lankan pitches and the Pakistan pitches at well, Pakistan probably more traditionally, but we haven't had a lot of cricket there. Sri Lanka at times have had pitches, obviously, that have been a little bit more like that. Indian pitches tend to collapse. Bangladesh pitches tend to, favor bowlers more. So that takes out almost all of Asia. Then you've got the seam favorable conditions. Uh, so that means that South Africa and New Zealand genuinely wouldn't do it. So it really doesn't leave that many places left from that perspective. It's really interesting question though. Christopher Will says, um, any experience of interacting with the Royals through the press corps? How active are presence? Are the Royals in cricket? No, you know, I would have no reason to ever interact with royal people. I don't care about royal people. I don't think there should be royal people. It's the whole thing's ridiculous. An old woman died. Lots of old women die. But no, never had a reason to. I can't think of anything. King Philip was probably the last hardcore cricket fan that I'm aware of, anyway. Within cricket, I know there's some great stories of him commenting on the racial profile of the Surrey team back in that. It must have been one of the great eras. It must have been Alex Tudor, Mark Butcher. I'm trying to think who else was playing. Hollyoaks, maybe. They had a lot of players who weren't white, and did I say King Philip, Prince Philip, whatever his name was? I don't know what these people are. Honestly, it's only the last 2 years I've ever worked out the difference between Henry and Will. Um, yeah. So I think he was probably the last one that I am aware of. But if you want my greatest Queen story, which I was like, I didn't even put this up on Twitter or anything, but I suppose it's probably, if it's ever going to go anywhere, the Wagon Wheel makes the most sense. The Queen has her own chair at Lords, and years ago when we were filming for Death of a Gentleman, they gave us full access to record at Lords, which is quite a big deal at that time. And we kind of went out and we were doing all these things. The problem was that the day that we were given full access to record happened to be the day that I had my son Zachariah with me, and Zed would have been about 18 months old at this point. And so I had to take him around Lords, and he would obviously, being a 1.5-year-old, maybe 2-year-old, he would run off and climb on things and pull things down. And he made his way over to the Queen's chair. And when he went over to the Queen's chair, they I can't remember, it might have been Claire who was running the Lord's media stuff at that stage, or the photography stuff. She was like telling us all about the chair, and she said, "Oh, do you want to take a photo of him sitting on it?" And I was like, "I want to take a photo of him sitting on everything," which I did. Got some great photos of him at Lord's, in fact. And so we then he was sat on there, and then we started to talk, and we were filming something else, and we turned around, and he was like standing on the chair, which of course is a massive faux pas. You're not supposed to stand on the Queen's chair. Hilariously, wasn't the most trouble that we got in that day. We had two other problems with Zachariah at Lords. The second one was that he kept running out onto the ground, and they have like a laser security thing, and he would run directly towards the pitch, which would set off all the alarms at Lords. And then the other thing that he did was it was a freezing cold day, and I had to and his clothes got unbuttoned, like his vest got unbuttoned, and the only place to do it carefully so he didn't get freezing cold was to take it back in the long room, which meant that the long room security thought that we were changing a nappy in the long room, and you can imagine how well they handled that. The people coming from everywhere, "You can't change a nappy in the long room." And I was like, I'm trying to rebutton him because he went a little askew. And yeah, so there you go. That's the most royal story I have. Zachariah standing on the Queen's chair. Aditya says, apart from Bradman, can you think of any player in the pre-World War II era who would walk into his country's all-time best 11? Hobbs, Hammond, and Sid Barnes walk into an do Hobbs, Hammond, and Barnes walk into an all-time English Test 11? So many good England top order players. It's tricky with Hobbs and Hammond. The Barnes thing's really interesting as well. I've said this before. He averaged 20 or 21 against Australia and 8 or 9 against South Africa. I don't doubt his talent. Does he make the all-time team? I don't know. Probably does, especially because he bowls pace / spin all as one combination, right? So he probably does make the all-time team, if we're being completely honest. Okay, so who else would there be? The only other ones would be there's no Australians before World War II other than Bradman. Then you've got the South Africans, so you've got Aubrey Faulkner. Again, because he's a spinner and an all-rounder, he might slip in to the South African all-time team. Obviously, they've had, you got Proctor, Callis. Am I missing anyone else as your main all-rounders? But Aubrey Faulkner's figures probably are not far off, some of the better South African figures, and plus the fact he could bat, be a hell of a number 6, 7, 8 in that kind of team. He's the only South African, I think, that makes it. I think the other guys, Bruce Mitchell type players, Sinclair type players, fantastic players, but I don't think they get in. So yeah, I think Aubrey Faulkner, Bradman, Barnes. I almost think Hobbs gets in. If you do a proper statistical analysis of Hobbs, and you look at when he was averaging above 50 and what everyone else was averaging, I think probably Hobbs would get in as well, would be my guess. Hammond, I'd have to go back and have a look at. It's tough with England because they have so many good players, in that team. Oh, sorry, you're missing one with England. Les Ames. Does Les Ames probably still gets in ahead of Matt Pryor, Alan Knott? Being how much better he was as a wicketkeeper batter than anyone else in his era. I think he's probably the only other one that I would put up there. Ian says, why does cricket have selectors when other sports don't? It seems mad. Why not just let the coach pick the squad? So this is fair. I don't think coaches can pick squads, and that's why you have general managers in other sports. And I think that's a part of the reason. I think the selectors comes from the English side of the game, Ian, where you used to have the ability to. It used to be when England played tests against Australia, that each individual place would pick the players that they wanted based on gate receipts, essentially. And so I think that's a big part of it. You also have that in the West Indies as well. And I think the selecting that thing came out of it. It also came out of the importance of men in suits, former players, and those sorts of things in choosing that. So in county cricket, I think the board / selection committee made decisions on county contracts really up until very recently. I'm not sure when that stopped exactly, and I'm not sure if it has stopped at every county, although I'm hoping it has. And so it really does come out of that kind of thing. There's no way, and you got to remember that when you're talking about a coach, traditionally, Ian, we didn't have coaches in cricket. So again, you needed something else. And so you would pick the selection committee would be the one that you would have representatives from when done properly, you would have selectors from a wide area of backgrounds. They would know the cricketers in their particular region. They would watch cricket in their particular region. Then they would make a decision based on who should go on tour. And when you went on tour, you would have the captain, the vice captain, a senior player, maybe the tour manager would then decide on who the final 11s were. That becomes completely different as coaches come into the game in the 80s, I suppose. The truth is that no international coach is watching enough domestic cricket to make those decisions, the same way that the head coach of an NBA team doesn't have final say over the squad because a general manager or the scouting network does, right? Same with baseball, same with a lot of other sports, same with football at a certain point. There's no way a manager of a football team who is involved day to day in their team can also tell you, who the best left back available is on the open market. They're only going to go with people they know. So you need specialists there. So in some ways, the selection committee actually made a lot of sense. Where the selection committee never made any sense is that as cricket does get the coach is then sort of separate to that and didn't always have a say in it. Then you've got the captain, which makes it even more confusing because you almost in cricket have two coaches at that point. And then we didn't go to the professional system that we should have gone to. So England have flirted around with it and have been there and thereabouts. But essentially, you should have a general manager working with some kind of a scouting network rather than individual selectors. And then you should be talking to the captain and coach going, okay, what kind of cricket do you want to play? We're going to go here. What do you think you need? And then the general manager, whatever that person's name is, high performance manager, works with the scouting network to go, okay, well, they want 2 skiddy bowlers because they're going up against this team on these pitches and they think they're going to need shorter skiddy bowlers. Or now we're going to Australia, they want 4 tall bowlers, right? Whatever you're looking for, left armers, off cutter bowlers, etc., etc. This is what you want to fill your team in. That would be the professional way. I'd say that at times England have got towards that. I'm not quite sure how it is now with Rob Key and how that is going. But I do think that England have gone towards that. There's still the actual selection committee doesn't really make sense because they don't look at it they're not looking at it from a specialist point of view. And also there's so much first class cricket being played that the old idea, and this is all around the world, and that isn't seen, right? You actually need people who are going to go back through the footage. And quite often that is not a 50-year-old player, former player. More likely that to be someone who's just left the game or maybe someone who didn't make it as in his career and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, I think a lot of it is just a holdout from the way that English cricket originally did things. That then filtered into other countries. And then as the coach came in, we've sort of trying to fit the coach into a structure that doesn't quite work. Christian says, the last 2 podcasts with Taha Hashim and Dan Gallen have been really interesting. Thank you very much. If you haven't listened to them, the one with Taha is about the South Asian Cricket Academy and about how 30% of amateur cricketers in the UK are of Asian descent and only 3 or 4% were playing professionally. Why that is the case, it's really the whole story is really interesting. And then Dan Gallen's one is about English cricket. The South Africans who played cricket for England, which again, it's really, really interesting. I'm not sure. There's so many of them, and I don't know anyone who's ever sat as many of them down as Dan managed to. Both those podcasts just really fascinating to me. But Christian says, do you know if any Asian international teams have tried to recruit English players with Asian heritage to play for them? So no international teams have done that. but I have heard of occasions where, and I think Taha might have mentioned it, where people of dual citizenships for franchise leagues and occasionally for domestic leagues have been looked at before. So no international teams have done it. To be fair, no international, England never did that in international cricket either. The only teams who I know who actively do that are of the associate nations, and I suppose Ireland still does it, where they're literally looking up a player and they go, oh, this guy's got an Irish passport or an Irish grandparent or an Irish parent or whatever it needs to be. I forget what it needs to be for Ireland. Or has played club cricket in Ireland for 3 consecutive years or etc. Or is married to an Irish woman, blah, blah, blah. What USA Cricket's currently doing, looking for anyone with any links to America, whether it be Corey Anderson's wife, I think, Liam Plunkett's wife, or just players who maybe have an American family connection or want to move to America, whatever that is. I don't like England. Don't do that, for instance. So England weren't recruiting Jofra Archer when he was young. Jofra Archer was recruited by a school. I forgot the name of the school now, but Chris Jordan was recruited by a school, Dulwich College. Owen Morgan was recruited by a school, Dulwich College. They then brought over to play, and then from that, the counties then take them, and then as they start to play good for county cricket, that is when England look at them. So no major international teams, but the Asian or non-Asian, are looking at recruiting players. Most of the recruiting is done at the associate level, and the rest is done by schools, by clubs, and by first-class teams, and now occasionally by franchises. As I said, you're seeing the odd franchise just go out and sniff around someone and say, oh, okay, well, you could play as a local here because of this, of your dual citizenship, because of your wife or whatever that may be. But the whole thing is really interesting. I think in Asia there's so much talent coming through. I'm not sure there's a reason, but I think what you'll start to see, Christian, is because we have so many players of dual ethnicity in cricket already. As that gets bigger and bigger, you might get situations where a player gets really big on the franchise circuit, maybe doesn't play for their national team, and then you'll have a position like you get with English footballers, and I'm assuming with European footballers in general, where they have the ability to pick between the country that they're living in now and maybe the country that their parents are from. Maybe it's an African nation or a Middle Eastern nation or wherever they have come from, or an Asian nation. I think we will see more of that in cricket. As players come through the franchise system, they won't come through the underage system in the same way that they did beforehand. Satchmo says, how would you currently rate England's chances for gaining the Ashes next year? It's in England. Probably, Australia still probably has a better batting lineup, although I'm not massively keen on the Australian batting lineup. But the England batting lineup is so poor. Cameron Green is really interesting because it's so rare that Australia has the ability to come to England with a seam bowling all-rounder who should be favoured by the conditions. And then if you look at that Australian bowling lineup, who's the weakest link at the moment? Maybe Mitchell Starc. But of course, if Mitchell Starc can work out the wobble ball completely, and it looks like he's starting to work it out, and then you can throw in guys like Scott Boland, on seam-friendly wickets, then that would be really hard for England to do it. As I was saying in the first question, England's form from this summer is really hard to understand because you had the flat ball era, right, where they were brilliant, and then you watch them versus South Africa. And if you'd have told me before that was the series we'd have against South Africa, I would have said that makes sense. In fact, I did a TalkSport podcast about it where I literally said that's what I expected from that series before Ben Stokes was captain, and Baz was coach. So in some ways, the first half of the summer was weird. The second half of the summer was exactly how we expect England to play. Their bowlers are still very much suited to those sorts of conditions, and they don't have much batting. If they'd got the worst end of the toss, or Dean Elgar had done better with his decisions at the toss, it's possible that they lose that series 2-1. And then how would we be feeling about it? So it's a really good question. I don't have a brilliant answer for you, Satchmo, but I do think that's a really interesting question. James says, should the ICC's policies for apartheid South Africa be used as a model for dealing with ICC members? Well, the ICC didn't really have a policy for apartheid South Africa. James, I don't know how much you know about that. The ICC really wasn't a big thing at that point. They really hadn't been an important part of cricket since 1910-11 when South Africa played. They didn't put any pressure on on South Africa to play teams without white players involved. The actual England stopped, New Zealand stopped playing South Africa. Obviously, West Indies, Pakistan, and India already weren't playing South Africa, and probably wouldn't have in some of those cases, even if South Africa had wanted to, but South Africa wouldn't have wanted to. New Zealand stopped playing them first. Australia play them. England were going to play them, and then the Basil D'Oliveira thing happens. Australia was supposed to host them afterwards. Don Bradman was very excited for that to go ahead. And then that didn't happen. And then they stopped playing. Then you have the first Women's World Cup where there is a team that plays as an international 11, which is a South African team. But South Africa by 75, so that was 73. By 75, it's seen as not right for South Africa to play in the World Cup, and they're not playing anyone else. So it's not really that the ICC had any policy in charge. So if you look at abnormal societies, which is what you mentioned in your question, the ICC's never really had to deal with that. Afghanistan's probably the first one that they had to deal with as far as not having a women's side. And we saw that they sort of ducked that one and allowed Afghanistan not to have a women's side. I don't know. There's so many, and how far do you push it? Of course, is the next thing. The thing with the South African thing is that it was so open and honest, the way that the South African races were, that, I mean, you look at Australia's history, you look at some of, maybe New Zealand's history, you look at segments of, obviously, the Indian population, what happened with Sri Lanka, what happened, you can make a big call for what has happened with Pakistani women at times in Pakistan. There's a lot of nations that fail that. And I think the difference was that South Africa was so open and honest with it in a way that, if you go back to Australia's racism was not in the same way. We now call it the White Australia policy, but it wasn't specifically known as that at the time. The way that Australians treated Indigenous people, because the Indigenous people were a minority, it didn't make as much news around the world. All these sorts of things. Not to mention, the treatment of women in many different cricket nations. Treatment of, I always said when Steve Davis came out as homosexual openly, that there was quite a few test playing nations at that point that he couldn't play in and practice his sexuality as he would like to. He couldn't take a husband or a boyfriend with him, for instance. So it's really tricky, is the question. Where do you draw the line? Where do you not draw the line? With those sorts of things. And that's always going to be a thing, especially with national sport. But that's always going to be a thing going forward. So I don't have a great answer for that. If you want, other than the fact that the ICC didn't really have a policy, it's just that everyone had already stopped playing South Africa. So we're a long way different from that now. Of course, you might have heard in one of the recent podcasts about Sri Lanka once boycotting a series against Israel. So, there's an interesting one from 1979 World Cup qualifiers. Ian says, Durham are facing a penalty of 16-point docking for a player having an oversized bat in a championship game. This is seemingly caused by too much tape applied. This seems quite a minor infraction, quite a heavy punishment, but who actually checks compliance when players get a new bat or fix old ones? I think the umpires have to look at that. Ian, I can't imagine it would be anyone else unless it's match referees. Also, how would you assess the impact of a noticeably oversized bat in terms of additional ability to protect the stumps versus increased likelihood of turning a play and miss into a net? That's always been the interesting one. Also, when a bat gets too big, I don't know if anyone's ever played with a novelty cricket bat. They're actually, a massive pain in the butt to swing. So yeah, look, you've got a very good point there. But we have laws in place, Ian, and if they had a problem with that, then obviously I think it should have just been fixed there and then. A 16-point docking seems crazy to me. But we are in a sport where Faf du Plessis was given almost the same penalty, or maybe it was the same penalty for having the wrong color shoelaces as he was for tampering with the ball. So it, I'm not even sure it goes on the podium of the stupidest thing, the fines we've ever seen in our sport. Ian. But yeah, I think what you say makes sense. You would get more edges from it. I doubt that the player was doing it intentionally. Although if they were, good on them as well. Certainly, in my view, should definitely not be a 16-point docking. I would be looking at docking points from the championship if you had multiple players doing stuff like that, because that would be Houston Astros level cheating. If it's just one player having too much tape on their bat, they should be fined and warned and told not to do it again, which seems normal human behavior. So maybe it won't happen in cricket. Kennedy says, do you think women's cricket is the right place to establish a new structure for running tests in a profitable and sustainable way, as their setup is less fixed and be more flexible to survive? I think that, and the problem is that women's cricket is run by men's cricket boards, Kennedy. So that's our first problem there. I think that if you looked at this from a marketing / structure, as you talk about it, profitable sponsor thing, what you would actually do is you'd say, okay, let's do a women's league. Let's let the ICC run it. Let's let it be sold as a league. Where you have to buy all the games, but you can show whichever ones you want, and all the players get paid out of a central pool. You could do it in a heartbeat, except for the fact that if the ICC did that and it worked straight away, that men's boards would feel awkward about it, about men's cricket, so they wouldn't even allow it to happen with a women's thing. But yes, you could do that really easily. You could also do that independently, of course, of all those cricket boards. And I think you could still make good money, and you'd probably be able to pay the women. You'd certainly be able to pay the women more than they're currently paid by the men's boards across all of cricket. Maybe not all. Actually, no, I think you'd be able to pay them more almost nation by nation as well. So yeah, it would work, but I can't see it happening because men's boards run women's cricket, and that it's been a strength over the last couple of years, but it's also a massive weakness. Raf Nicholson has written about this a lot, that there were really good things that the women's boards were able to do that the men's boards don't care about. There was a long period of time where they took over women's cricket and then ignored it. That's not the case anymore. But there are problems when you don't have people who are thinking women first in that sort of environment. Abraham says, is there an empirical basis to the statement that the IPL is the highest quality T20 league, or is it something that can only be analysed, expressed subjectively? No, you can look at it, Abraham, because you can look at it via the players who come in and what their records are in that league compared to other leagues. Obviously, that gets a little bit tricky because it is Asian pitches and Indian pitches are slightly different, all those sorts of things. But on a very basic level, we can do that. We can also see that the very best performing overseas players in the world are obviously ending up in that league. So again, we know it's going to be a stronger league. But yes, no, we can definitely tell that. So I think IPL is the strongest. PSL's been the second strongest. Big Bash was up there for a while and has gone down a little bit, and CPL passed that 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. And those are considered the three strongest leagues when you look at the performances of the players in that league compared to the performances of the players outside that league. When you look at how many of those players are being recruited, all those sorts of things we look at. So yeah, there is an empirical. It's not something I have ever had to worry about. And there isn't a huge difference between most of the best franchise leagues that you need to worry about it. But I think Amal Dese might have done it. I know Dan Weston has done it, where you have the ability to go, that league, let's say the IPL is 1.0, and I think some people might have had the PSL at 1.0, and then you might have the CPL at 0.95. You might have the Big Bash and the 100 at 0.9 or whatever. I'm just making those numbers up, so I don't know if those are accurate or not. But those are the sorts of things that people do when they're looking for overseas players in those sorts of leagues. I've just never had to really do it and set up a system like that. But I've had access to other people who've done it. But there isn't as big a difference as you probably think between the top 4 or 5 leagues. When they talk about the Big Bash being a farmers league and everything, when the IPL fans talk about that, when you actually break it down, it's not as big a difference, I think, as it maybe sometimes looks. But that said, if you're getting all the best overseas players in the tournament straight away, you should be one of the strongest leagues. Thank you to everyone on Patreon. And we've got quite a few questions in the chat. Remember, just raise your hand at any time, and you can. And we have Drew. You there, Drew? Oh, Drew? While Drew works out how to, or tries to press unmute. Big thanks to the minor league cricket people. And if you're watching this video, whenever it comes out, you can see I've got an Atlanta Fire shirt, which I'm massively excited about. So I've also got a Seattle Thunderbolts shirt and just a minor league shirt in general. So I will always take freebies when given. Drew, you there? Well, you're taking mute off, Drew. All right, why don't you just try it? I'll drop you off, mate, and you can try and come back. We had a couple of others anyway. Maston, you there? Maston? I don't hear anyone here. Maston? Oh. Try this one more time. Ollie, are you there?
Hi, Jarrod. Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes, finally. Yes. Go ahead, mate.
Awesome. A big fan of yours, by the way. I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on the state of playing Australian white ball cricket. Everything seems to be kicking off with the Big Bash, and the series against New Zealand was, with all due respect, one of the worst quality ODI series I've ever seen. Then Aaron Finch has resigned as captain. Just kind of what's going on? I'm amazed you guys won the T20 World Cup, but
I think everyone is. I think of the modern T20 World Cups, I think that's probably the luckiest win we've ever seen. If you go back to I keep saying this, if you go back to the semi-final, I think it was Marcus Stoinis goes within about a foot of being caught, and Australia probably lose that game by 50 runs if he gets caught at that point, unless Matthew Wade on his own does something major. Yeah, I think what you have to remember about Australian white ball teams is they've never really had a solid plan between World Cups, and they don't really plan that much of World Cups. They've been incredibly lazy. I remember they turned up at the Champions Trophy a couple of years ago, and they didn't look like they'd thought about it that much. Outside of, the captain and the coach talking about it, like there seemed to be no structure of planning. 2019 World Cup, Josh Hazlewood, they said he wasn't fit. Josh Hazlewood was in the country playing for Australia A at the same time. And it's like, I know at that stage they hadn't really moved back towards thinking Josh Hazlewood was a white ball bowler, but you're playing a World Cup in England. It didn't make sense to overlook him in that way. The fact that, in fact, if you want to go, Josh Hazlewood's one of the best examples of this. Josh Hazlewood is currently ranked #1 in the world in T20 internationals, and he is he's now become a star IPL bowler as well. He did all that on his own. So he basically went off and worked on his own. They didn't think of him as a white ball bowler at all, which is why he's not in that 2019 World Cup. And you've got someone who is quite obviously a very smart bowler, a very fast bowler, a very tall bowler, a very skillful bowler. I'm not saying he's an obvious white ball bowler, because Vernon Philander didn't, and Jimmy Anderson was faded out, although Anderson's record's still quite good. So I'm not saying it was that obvious, but they never pushed him, and it really shows that they were never thinking he should have been used in the same way that Mitchell Starc was, which is let him play a little bit in between, but rest him for the majority of times. But then if he's fit and firing and ready to go before a World Cup, you bring him back in, because he's still in your best 4 bowlers in your country, or fast bowlers in your country. The fact that they completely pushed him to the side really does tell you a little bit about that. So they haven't really thought about that. The thing I would say is you almost have to. They're probably the team that you look at their form in between World Cups the least, right? Because they just don't care.
Yeah, they just turn up. They just turn up and have a go.
So it's really hard to know. Like, for instance, the Mitch Marsh thing happened by accident, and he helped them win the World Cup final. Marcus Stoinis batting down the order. By that stage, that had happened by accident. Matthew Wade batting down the order. That kind of happened by accident. Josh Hazlewood getting good happened by accident. We're talking about one tournament that they won with those 4 players, right? None of that was really planned. I think Mitch Marsh played in the West Indies, and they kind of worked out they didn't have a number 3. I can't even remember the full set, the full discussion, and it just sort of happened. If you look at the way England and India, for instance, are the other 2 major teams, they really think a long way in advance. Even if they get it wrong, there's a lot of planning. There's a lot of testing players out. Look at Avesh Khan. They've given him about 15. They wanted a fast bowler. They gave him about 15 T20s, and now they've decided for the World Cup, do you know what? He's probably just not good enough. We're not going to give him a go. That was a distinctive plan that they had, and they lost, and they basically lost. I don't know if interest in him is the right word, but then they lost the desire to use him in that sort of way. So you can see that India and England had a 4-year plan, right? And same with World T20. Australia just hasn't done that. Now, I would say Australian cricket over the last few years has really been relying on talent and almost nothing else. And it's a real concern. And I've had some pretty big conversations with some major people in Australian cricket who agree, but they haven't had the ability to kind of wrestle it back and have more long-term planning.
So on that talent thing, who do you think is going to take the captaincy? Because I was hearing Alex Carey being mentioned, which seems like a big stretch.
I wouldn't have thought so.
I mean, is Smith going to get the role or Warner? But their ban seems still in place. Well, Smith's not, but Warner.
No, Smith's ban isn't. Warner's is. I mean, Warner's a really big chance of getting that. They love Travis Head as a future leader. And it would seem like an interesting person to bring back in, almost a George Bailey-like decision if they went with that. So there isn't really an obvious person there. But yeah, I mean, you're right. The thing is, when do they need to worry about the one-day captain?
Yeah, like next year, I guess, before the tournament.
And that's kind of what I think they'll do. I could be wrong.
That's so very Australian to do that.
The only thing that is different now is George Bailey is involved.
Yeah.
As the main selector. And, without putting words in George's mouth, me and him have had a lot of discussions over the years. He generally agrees that sometimes Australia does this sort of stuff. And I think as chairman of selector, he's tried to be slightly more proactive. Although I think it's the wrong job. I think he should have had the Rob Key job. Get rid of the selectors, make him manager. I'm not saying it had to be George, whoever had that position, make them managing director so that they can start the plan. The problem is, if you're chairman of selectors, you're not actually in charge of the day-to-day preparations, right? And I think that's where Australian cricket has gone wrong. So they've had people like Pat Howard, and I forget the other guy's name, and they have who's the Victorian cricketer? They had Ben Oliver. I'm not sure what Peter Roach's role was, but they've had a few people kind of in those positions, but they've never had the power and the ability. It's a really important position, because if you look at what Rob Key sort of did, and Ed Smith and even Ashley Giles, they weren't just picking a team. They were picking people, and then they were also going, okay, so now these players are the ones that are in our mind, so we need to send them and to have this. It needs to be this uniform thing, and I think that's part of the reason that Australian cricket did slightly fall behind, as far as planning goes and professionalism goes, is they didn't really have. And this is just from the outside, but I have talked to a few people. They never had a key decision maker, right? So a chairman and selector could make a few different calls, but I'm not sure a chairman of selectors could put on tournaments or tours or whatever they need to be able to do. I'm not sure anyone's ever had the same level of control that Nathan Lehman, Owen Morgan, Trevor Bayliss, Ashley Giles, Ed Smith, Rob Key have had over the team. And part of that goes to, having Aaron Finch as coach, as captain, was also part of the problem of that, is that he wasn't the sort of person who would just go, come on, guys, we've got to do all this together the way that Owen Morgan did. Doesn't mean that he wasn't a good captain and wasn't a good leader, but he wasn't sitting there going, this system is broken. And the other problem is that I have had a person within Cricket Australia say to me, probably not a good thing that Australia won that World Cup, because now you can't say the system's broken because we just won another World Cup. And that's been going back. You can go back till 2010. There are lots of people in Australian cricket are like, this system doesn't make any sense. We're not running this the way that we should be running it. But you know, they won the 2015 World Cup, right?
Yeah, and you wouldn't be surprised if they went and won it again later this year, to be honest.
Do you know what I mean? On talent, they won that. Just go back to that World Cup before. Mitch Starc was probably, for a good period of time, the best white ball bowler in the world over the combined formats. Bumrah probably replaced him, and obviously got Rashid Khan as well. But for a good period of time, Mitch Starc was, I would make a very big claim that Mitch Starc was the best bowler in the 2015 World Cup, the best bowler in the 2019 World Cup. And if you look at IPL seasons individually, no one was even close to his level. Right?
Yeah, I mean, the two
Shaheen Afridi
deliveries
was
that
doing.
like come to mind from those World Cup are his to McCullum and his to Stokes. Like,
Do you know what I mean? And he did it with the old ball. He did it with the new ball. He could do it at the death. All those sorts of things, right? They won that last World Cup with him going for what, 55 or 60 in right? And so that's just, it's ridiculous that they managed to be able to do that when for so long he was 2019 World Cup, he was almost the difference between them not being a force in that tournament, and ending up almost in the final, or at least in the semi-final. So thanks so much for your question though, mate. That was really, really great. I'll just see if anyone else has come back into Keshav has come up, and I see there's a couple of written questions, but you got one there, Keshav?
Yep, can you hear me?
I can, mate. What's your question?
Yeah, Pakistan just announced the T20 squad today, and I don't know if you have had chance to see the squad, the names, but I was just having a look, and none of the batsmen have a strike rate of 140 or above. I mean, the highest one is around 135, 136, which is Shadab Khan. He's also not like a frontline batsman; he's an all-rounder. So, what sort of chances do you see if they continue with this team, especially given the fact that they didn't really do very well in Asia Cup?
Didn't do very well in Asia Cup, but they should have made the final of the last World Cup, and played brilliant cricket in that tournament.
I mean, looking at the Australian conditions, I know they got to the finals of Asia Cup and semi-finals of the World Cup, but that was in UAE. There, they could afford that sort of strike rate.
I'm not sure you can afford that kind of strike rate anywhere unless you're playing in Guyana or dodgy Bangladesh wickets. I think that they have a different kind of team. They basically try and score between 150 and 170 and back their bowlers to not do that. So I think you're thinking about it from the wrong perspective. You're thinking about it from they need to score quicker. They think about it from we need to score consistently and give our bowlers the ability to win every particular game. I mean, you could argue that they could have won the Asia Cup if they'd taken catches. As I said, they had Australia in all sorts in that semi-final of that World Cup as well. They played some brilliant cricket earlier in that tournament. I don't agree with it as a theory. I think it's a limiting theory. And I think you're putting too much pressure on one side of your lineup, right? Their bowlers have to be consistently outstanding for them to win those tournaments. Whereas if you're backing your batters and your bowlers, some games your bowlers will be poor, but your batters will make 200 and your bowlers will be able to carry that off. But we've seen New Zealand be really successful with a similar kind of model in probably more one-day cricket, but even T20 cricket to a certain point. New Zealand have a lot of guys who smack the hell out of the ball, and they've kind of gone more with those consistent players, more so than the guys who smack the hell out of the ball. So there is an argument that I have heard that in tournament play, especially for T20s, what you want is batters who are going to keep you in every single game, and you want your strength to be bowlers. And if you look at the history of white ball World Cups and Champions Trophies and whatever, more often than not, the best bowling team wins the tournament rather than the best batting lineups. So there is an argument to be said for that their theory is not that flawed. But I just think it's not the way I would go into a tournament like that. But I haven't looked at their full what players they have available to them and everything. So
The thing is, they have put Fakhar Saman in the reserves. He was one of those rare attacking top order batsmen, and Shan Masood has replaced him. So I just felt that now, already with the openers being that sort of conservative approach, if you have Shan Masood or a Heather Ali at 3 or 4, or even Iftikhar, so that's one too many anchors for me, and that's a complaint that has been often referred to Indian team as well. That Rohit, Rahul, Virat, all these guys are anchors. Even Pant is now turning into one slowly and steadily. So, do you think that 150 to 170 approach could work on flatter wickets in Australia?
Yes, I mean, Adelaide Strikers once did it in the Big Bash, won the tournament. So yes, it can work anywhere because if you've got strike bowlers who take wickets, it's when I say 150 to 170, that's depending on your conditions, right? Let's say this is the most batting friendly conditions ever of a World Cup, right? My 150 to 170 then would be 160 to 180 or 170 to 190. And if you're then looking at pitches that don't go very well, you're looking at 130 to 150. Does that make sense? It's not what you're looking for is a regular score. I'm not where you're looking for your top score never to be much more than 180 odd and your bottom score never to be much lower than 140, right? So that you always have something to bowl at. That's what they're looking for. If they're better batting pitchers, then those numbers will go up, and if they're worse batting pitchers, those numbers will go down. What they're looking for is that core score that gets them in every single game and allows their bowlers to win the games for them. Just on Fakhar Zaman, I mean, his strike rate in T20 internationals is 129, and his strike rate in T20 in franchise cricket is about 135. So they have got a similar thing to India, where they have a lot of players who don't particularly, as you said before, are anchors. Even Fakhar Zaman, who we think of as very attacking because of one-day cricket, hasn't been able to do that consistently in T20 cricket. The fact that Shan Masood has come in, I think, means that they really are backing that plan. Now, that plan might be wrong, but that's what they're going in with. They have decided that is how they are going to win the World Cup. They've made the semi-finals of one tournament, finals of another tournament, and they're backing themselves. They might be wrong, but that's what they're doing.
Mickey Arthur recently said that, it makes sense if they could separate Babar and Rizwan at the top, like bring one of them at 3 and open with either Fakhar or somebody else who can accelerate a little more. How do you see that plan going ahead? If will it make any difference?
Well, Fakhar's strike rate is 129.
No, I mean anybody else other than Fakhar. Just the separation of those two successful openers. Do you see?
They don't want to. You're still thinking about this in the wrong way. You're thinking about it that this is a flawed team that you need to fix. They're trying to get more players like that in here, right? So why would they want to do that? That's the opposite of what they want to do. What you're saying is they should get a bunch of more attacking players. I mean, I'd have to go back to my PSL notes and have a look at what players are just outside the squad to have a look if they have those players available to them. But they have made a clear decision that they want as many anchors as possible into this side, being that they've just brought in King Anchor himself, Shan Masood, one of the highest list A averages of all time. He is one of the anchorest anchors of anywhere, right? Very clever player, and is certainly improved his T20 play massively over the last couple of years. But they want more anchors. If anything, they're looking to find more players like that, not less players like that. What you're talking about is a completely different team. But the only player that you've mentioned so far is Fakhar Zaman, who has a similar record. So it seems to me that they've decided that this is their strength, not their weakness. And you're thinking about it as their weakness.
Do you think that approach can take them to the semis or the finals of this T20 World Cup?
It just did. It just took them to a bunch of finals.
The one in Australia.
But why would it not? What's the difference? I don't understand what you think you're saying.
Why would it not? Because I just feel the other teams are playing a little more updated cricket and these guys are still stuck.
Are they, or are they playing to their strengths? They're not.
That's why I'm asking, right? Like if you compare others, if you compare other teams like the strong contenders for semis, if you compare it with Pakistan and their approach, do you think
All right.
this team can make the semis?
Think about it this way. Go back. And so New Zealand since the 2015 World Cup have made a bunch of finals in a bunch of different formats. Correct?
Yeah.
What is different to how they play than Pakistan? They back their
Sorry,
bowlers. They back their bowlers, and they make moderate totals.
okay.
Right? I mean, it's exactly the same format. So when you say they're not following other teams, what you're really saying is that they're not ultra attacking, but they are ultra attacking Pakistan. They're ultra attacking with their bowling. Look at how many fast bowlers, raw fast bowlers they had in Asia Cup, right? No other team's going into a tournament with that kind of weaponry, right? That's not how other teams are looking at T20 cricket at all. You're focusing on one part of the game, and you're completely overlooking, the entirety of what they are doing.
But even if I buy their approach for defending their totals with a good attack, what about chasing? Like in the Asia Cup final, Rizwan was criticized for playing around the ball for a 170 chase. So do you see them with the same approach even while chasing the targets? Because both of them just play. Sometimes it feels selfish. I don't want to use that word, but it feels like they're for their own rankings or runs. The team suffers then later on.
It doesn't really matter if it's selfish or not. That's a completely different argument. And also, if they're all doing it, you'd have to argue it's probably not selfish and probably more to do with team plans. But they're also doing it domestically, so maybe it's just how they play. Well, if you're chasing 170, and let's say he gets to, I can't remember how many balls did he face in that.
He was 40, I think 49 ball 56 or 57.
All right. If he then hits 30 runs off the next 10 balls, would you still be talking to me about that innings?
I don't think he has the game for 10 ball 30.
It does once he's on 50 off 50. He's plenty of catch-up innings. Heaps of them do it. Most batters can hit 30 off 10 once they're already on 50 off 50. That's not that big a leap. That's a fairly normal leap. But even if it was 30 off 15, very doable again. He could do that in twos, right? It's a completely different argument. And as I said, it doesn't matter if you're setting or chasing. What you said there doesn't mean anything to me, realistically, from that perspective. Because a 50 or 50 balls is bad if you're batting first and is bad if you're batting second, right? But he's doing that so that he can put on extra runs at the end. That's how they think about it. That's how him and Bubba think about it. We've seen them do it successfully, and we've occasionally seen them do it non-successfully. It's not how I would coach a team or manage a team in T20 cricket. But at the same time, it's really weird that they've been successful doing it. So if they do have the right bowling lineup to be able to do that, as I said before, my biggest problem with it is more to do with the fact that you're putting too much pressure on the bowling side being fantastic to win those games. And so that your batting lineup is very rarely going to put on a special total because you've got your two top order and maybe 3 or 4 in this case now, guys who are all going to at least be 20 off 20, maybe 30 off 30 in some cases, right? That means that you are limiting your top end score. But it also means that if you have all those different players, you're not going to get bowled out for 115 very often. You're not going to get bowled out for 125. You're not going to get bowled out for 87, or you're not going to end up in a situation where you're 6 down in the 12th over, right? So you have to also factor that into your conversation, and you're not factoring that in at all. You're not factoring in the fact that they have the ability to regularly score totals and that they're regularly winning games. That has to be factored into any argument that you are making. What you are saying is the only way to play T20 cricket is to go out and smash the ball. If that was the case, wouldn't everyone already be doing that? And wouldn't those be the most successful teams? And at the moment, they're not always, right? I mean, who was the most attacking team in the IPL? Punjab, right? It fell down. They didn't have the players to be able to do it to begin with. So there are still going to be more than one way to play. And if you follow football or basketball or baseball or any of these sports, even as one method gets really popular, another method is often really popular. And so having a bowling team is still a very profitable thing to have. And so Pakistan are following that up, and they think that their best way of matching their bowlers is to have a batting lineup that always keeps them in the game. And to be fair, that is the case. If they'd taken a bunch of their catches against Sri Lanka, they probably would have been in a position where they wouldn't have had to chase 170 either. And if they're chasing 155, you might argue they have the ideal batting lineup for that.
Yeah, I get that, but as you said, they sometimes put enormous pressure on the bowlers to defend or something
They're
like
always
that.
doing that. There's absolutely no doubt. But they've made that decision.
So if you apply the same logic to the middle order, then like these guys take up so many overs up front. So that puts the middle order, lower middle order, every time they're chasing like 45, 50 in the last 4 overs, and they fail to perform more often than not.
Whoa. They fail to perform more often than not. They've just made the final of the Asia Cup.
I'm
They've
talking
just made the final of the semi-final. They're not failing to perform, are they?
No, I'm talking about the middle order and lower, the Asifs and the Kushnil Shahs and these guys, failing to finish.
Yeah, but that could be for a number of different reasons. It might be the pressure, as you've just said, or they might have been told, this is what we need you to do. This is our lineup. We are going to take up 80 balls from our top 4 every game. And from those 80 balls, maybe we'll score 100 runs. From the last 40 balls available, we're hoping to score 60 to 80 runs, right? That's the plan. It can be a shit plan, mate. I mean, as I said, I think it puts too much pressure on the bowling unit. You're right, it also puts too much pressure on the middle order. But they're winning games. It's a really weird thing to be picky on a team that is literally found a method that is winning for them and has worked for them, and they're going in on it. If you can give me 4 or 5 really attacking T20 batters that could come in, that's fine. As I said, I would never assemble a team this way. I think it's too one-sided. It's like a football team where they're too good on defense and can't score any goals, right? But if they're winning, isn't that more important?
No, that's completely, I buy that 100%. But the whole point of my conversation was in the last 1 year, like even if you factor in the World Cup, after that they have played in Bangladesh and some series at home, and again Asia Cup in the UAE. So all this win percentage is looking good because of these conditions. So the whole point was the next World Cup is not in these conditions, or whether this approach will work or not. That's all.
But that's not at all what you asked originally. That's a completely different thing. As I said, Adelaide Strikers have used this style before. We've seen many T20 teams around the world try similar styles, have a lot of anchors. It can work in Bangladesh. It can work in Guyana. It can work at the Gabba. It can work at Nottingham, right? All those different, that if you have genuine strike bowlers and your batters can make whatever is a par score consistently, or within a par score, and you have strike bowlers, then you're going to win in any conditions. That's not a conditions-based theory, right? If you're saying they're only winning because their players can only play spin or lower bouncing wickets, or are good only against Asian teams or whatever, that's different. That's nothing to do with the actual strategy. The actual strategy works kind of everywhere, because as long as your Pakistan bowlers can take a lot of wickets in Australia, then that's all you're asking them to be able to do. And being that Shadab Khan has dominated a big bash series, half the Pakistani bowlers have been found via the big bash. There's absolutely nothing to say that those bowlers won't be consistent. And if you've got 2 world-class quality batters at the top of your order, you've got someone like Shah Masood, who is obviously a very quality test player on occasions, and you've got a couple of batters like that. Well, you would back them against good quality pace bowling in Australia, unless there are weaknesses that I haven't thought about there. That's a completely different argument to what you're saying. You're saying that this theory can only work in Asia because I don't even know why, but because they're lower scoring grounds. I would assume is what you mean.
No, I meant like the results we have seen are mostly in Asia, and apart from that, whenever they have traveled abroad with this approach, they have lost the series.
But this is the theory that you're talking about is not a theory that is successful in Asia, though, because it's been successful for New Zealand outside of Asia. So what you're really talking about is whether Pakistan's team can travel. That has nothing to do with their lineup, right? That's just, do they have the players who are good enough to be able to do that, right? That's a completely different argument than what you're making. Anyway, mate, thank you so much for your questions. And
Thank you.
yeah, let's see what else we've got here. If anyone else has got anything in the any other hands, I think we only had Ollie and Keshuv. We had a couple of people who couldn't ask their questions. I'll just see if anyone's written anything here. Siddharth says, how has cricket impacted the English language? Yeah, massively. The phrase stumped comes from cricket. Hat trick comes from cricket. Bowl one over. Superstar or megastar? I always get confused. One of those is from cricket. Sticky wicket. Yeah, massively. I did an American podcast with with an Australian, Jim Jeffries, a comedian, and I went through all the different phrases that Americans use all the time that they don't realize are cricket phrases. So yeah, there's heaps. I think there's about 10 or 12 kind of major ones that are just used by most people who use English as their first language and don't realize that they're cricket phrases. Even some cricket people don't understand that they're, when someone's confused and they say, I'm stumped, I don't think they realize that that is literally from cricket. Drew said, why didn't Scott Boland get another chance after the Ashes if he has such a good record? I'd have to have a look at, they played in Pakistan. My dad was thinking he should bowl in Pakistan, but I don't think that was the case. They played in Sri Lanka. If they were playing in New Zealand, South Africa, England, West Indies, I would expect Scott Boland to be there and thereabouts. Scott Boland's not in their 4 best bowlers. I think he's probably the best answer to that. He had a brilliant start to his career, but I've been watching Scott Boland play for a decade. If you're expecting him to come in and average, what if it was 8 all the time, that's not going to happen. But I definitely think that they're going to continue to use him. But I think they'll use him when it suits him, which is how you should select players. William says, what, if anything, could the ECB do to promote the English county structure to get fans and followers outside of county members? They're not going to, William, so it doesn't matter. What would you do? So hard because, essentially what you would do is what the 100 have done. You would almost restructure the whole thing from beginning to end. If you wanted more county fans, it's a really good question. I'm not sure I can answer that off the top of my head, actually. Sorry. Rohan says, do you expect a truckload of runs from Kohli now? He's finally hit 100 again. No, not really. I don't think the block was him not making 100. I think there were technical problems. I think maybe age could have been a problem. I think his headspace was a problem. I think the 100 thing, I'm not saying it didn't bother him. I don't think that was the issue, though. The issue was he wasn't batting as good as he had been. His averages had dropped. I think bowling teams have got better plans for him. I think the wobble ball is a big problem for the way he plays. And so I certainly believe that that is the case. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to chuck them to raise their hands. I just wanted to shout out, just while I'm waiting for anyone to raise their hands, just wanted to shout out that we have the 5 Nation podcast now up on 99.94. We have England, South Africa, West Indies, India, and Sri Lanka. The Sri Lanka is the latest one, so go and support Mark and Estelle if you're a Sri Lankan fan, or if you just want to catch up with what happened after the Asian Cup. That podcast has started really well. And I also want to say, I know a lot of people can't come through to this chat, that it's not free for work or it's in the wrong time zone for them. or there's a lot of Pakistani people as well who can't use Spotify Live. Obviously, if you do want to get questions in, you can always do that via the Patreon. It's the first class and above that allows you to ask questions on this podcast. But another way, if you do want to leave any questions or any feedback on any of the Red Inca podcasts, you can put a review up on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us get our name out there, and helps us with sponsors, helps us with the Apple charts and everything else. And any new ones, I'm more than happy to read them out. So, for instance, Smithy says, Cricket Plus, so much deeper than usual stuff. Don't know what that means, but I like it. Cricket Plus makes me. I like just putting plus on the end of words. Woodamansky says, Jade Dernbach, I can recommend this excellent Red Inca podcast from Jarrod Kimber with Jade Dernbach. Yeah, I think that was definitely. Oh, he goes on to say a bit more as well. About it was essentially where we talked about death bowling, and it's funny. Jade is one of those players that I think you probably, as a fan, wouldn't have thought would be a great commentator. But he's brilliant. I've worked with him on quite a few series now, and I was desperate to get him involved with that podcast and get him on. And he's a really, really interesting person. And just talking about how it took him 3 years to perfect that slow ball, which obviously went on to be the thing that got him an international call-up. It's a really good podcast if you get a chance. Kosham Boy says, always thought-provoking, stat-backed views and analysis. When I get a chance to look up the stats. Some of the Patreon questions catch me out sometimes. JK provides weekly insights which you simply don't get elsewhere. Well, I'll take that. Thank you very much, Kosham Boy. And Haida Chima says, love this podcast. So insightful and interesting. Well, I love you, Haida Chima. So big thanks. So if you ever did want to, something read out, feel free to put those, put up a review. And thanks to everyone who has, if you can go through to the Apple Podcast app, what's it called, Podcast now, and do that. And one last quick question from Keshuv, and then we'll finish up here. Keshuv, what have you got?
Yeah, I thought nobody's raising hand, so I might as well take the
That's all
advantage.
right.
So, your thoughts on Indian squad, just briefly. Any surprise exclusions or inclusions? What do you make of it?
I haven't really done anything on any of the squads. I'm going to do a big video when they're all up. So there was no point with me having a look at it. Obviously, without Jadeja, they're kind of missing a very important cricketer. And so how they fit Harshal, Hardik, Akshar, Chahal, Ashwin is really fascinating for Australia. How that group comes together. You could, the problem is, of course, that, Chahal is probably what you would want to be an automatic selection in somewhere like Australia, but because he doesn't have any batting at all, does that cause more problems? Is Ashwin's batting, which is really good in Asia, is that going to, which has done very well in the IPL, is that really going to work in Australia when it comes to hitting? I think, looking back at his test record years ago, he was always a really, world-class all-rounder in Asian conditions when it comes to batting, but not really overseas. But has he had a big enough transformation? Akshar, again, will his bowling translate to Australia, which I find really interesting. So the very basic selections that I'm aware of from that perspective, I really find it. I've been thinking about how I'm going to talk about that Indian team. I listened to the 99.94 podcast. Sarah and Nikesh did a really good podcast on it. So I know basically the team of that one. But yeah, that collection of 6 people, I think it's 6 that I just said, how that fits in is really interesting.
Yeah, I heard the podcast. Like, I'm a regular listener of all the 99.94. I loved their analysis, and one of the key points I thought was a couple of people in spotlight, like Ravi Bishnoi in the reserves. I think his time will come, but the other interesting one was Mohammad Shami. Like, a lot of people are in his favor, but I just feel it's a lot to do with perceptions with Shami in T20s, because he doesn't really have a great record. And even if he would have replaced, there's nobody else he could have replaced in the 15. Everybody warrants a place in this squad, right?
Yeah, so Mohammad Shami is really interesting because he was a terrible T20 bowler for a long time, and Ishant Sharma got a lot of bad press for, and Murshid have got a lot of bad press for being a terrible T20 bowler. Mohammad Shami never did. And I say that as, you know, a massive fan of him obviously as a test match bowler. And he was a bad T20 bowler. He has been better over the last couple of years, but I think your last statement is pretty accurate. Like, I'm not sure where he fits into this. Yeah, Arshdeep is there for death bowling and to be a left armour. Bhuvi is there to be a top and tail guy, and hopefully if the ball swings. Jasprit is automatic, obviously. And then you've got Harshal has a little bit of batting to him. Can probably bowl a little bit in the middle and a little bit at the death. I don't know how he fits with Hardik. And then you've got a little bit of Hardik's bowling, right? Like, where does Mohammad Shami fit into that lineup to begin with? It's not, there's no obvious thing that he does better than any of those people that I just said. So unless you wanted to go all in with Mohammad Shami and Bumrah with the new ball, and basically say, these are our two best, most skillful new ball bowlers, that means we can keep Jasprit for the middle and the end, you know, and go with that kind of a lineup, which is fine. But is Shami's record enough to persuade you of that? I kind of think if Bumrah is, if Bhuvi's not fully fit, then that's the position that Shami probably comes in for. But if not, I don't see automatically anywhere where he's better than any of the other players who are currently in the squad. And also the whole reserves thing is really interesting too, right? If Arshdeep is injured, or Bumrah is injured, is Shami really the guy you want replacing him? If Bhuvi's injured, yeah. So I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, so Shreyas Iyer is also the backup on the reserves, right? And it's like, well, he doesn't, you know, if Deepak Huda is injured, you don't really want Shreyas Iyer coming in, right? And it's, I haven't seen, that's the only one where I know, I don't know the full squad, but I know a little bit from that podcast. And I don't know the full squad of the Pakistan one as well. But the reserve thing really doesn't make any sense to me, because if, I don't know, if Mark Wood is picked for England, right? And the reserve bowler is Reece Topley, right? It's just like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't want Reece Topley to come in and replace Mark Wood. I want someone else like Mark Wood to replace Mark Wood. That's why I had Mark Wood in my squad. I don't just want the next bowler to come in. So I was a bit confused about that. But yeah, when I go back to Shami, he has been better over the last couple of years.
Deepak Chahar is in reserve, so I thought for Bhuvi's potential replacement, he is like for like, but Shami and Iyer doesn't really make sense, because Iyer has this world-renowned problem of short ball, and maybe Sanju Samson could have been a better replacement. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Shami can't really come in for somebody like an Arshdeep or a Bumrah for death bowling.
No, I mean, you know, that's not what you're looking to replace. And I have to have a look at the rules if you can bring someone else in or whatever. But if the announcing the replacement players, and I don't think they're the only country to have done it. Well, I have to go and have a look. But announcing the replacement players doesn't make any sense, because of you don't know who's going to get injured or how the tournament's going to be going, right? So I don't really get that. But anyway, thanks for both your questions. Thank you to Ollie. Sorry to the people who put their hand up and couldn't come through. But yeah, just thank you to everyone for coming through. Remember, you can support us on Patreon. You can listen to all the other 99.94 podcasts that are out there. A shout out to Bodyline T-shirts. They're about to send me a bunch of new T-shirts. Although, as I said, this is my minor league shirt. Yeah, but rate and review and do all those things. If you are enjoying the 99.94 network, and I don't just mean my podcast, but if you're enjoying some of the other international ones, the more that you tweet about it, the more that you write reviews, you rate them on whatever app that you're listening to, that all helps us make sure that we have more shows. So, the international podcasts are just the beginning, and there are many, many more shows. We do actually have a very, very big podcast that we're going to be announcing soon. But we'll wait. We'll wait just a little bit longer there before giving you the details. But the more support that we get from the podcast listening community, the more shows that we can add. So thank you everyone for listening. Huge fan. Huge fan. I keep saying huge fan. Huge thanks to everyone. There was quite a full room on the Spotify Live today. So thank you to everyone who came live. But obviously, you can listen to this in many different places as you can the 99.94 network. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next time.